Hi, today we'll be coding this loading animation using a single div, pure CSS, and quite a few tricks you may not know. We already have the div right there. We have some of the colors we'll be using in this demo. Let's get started. So our load element, we are going to have a progress that's going to be 35 out of 100, and yes, that's 35%. However, we're not going to use the percent unit because in CSS we cannot do this. 35% divided by 1% in order to get the unitless value 35. Since we cannot do this, we are going to keep it unitless, and wherever we need a percent value, we're going to multiply with 1%. So in general, we are going to have p multiplied with 1%. Okay, now what we want to do here at first is put this value on the screen, and we are going to do so using the content of a pseudo element. So after, and if I could type that would be great, content, and this is not going to work because CSS cannot convert between this number and a string, which is the value we need to have for this content, which is why we're going to use the counter trick. So counter, like that, and of course here it's going to be the counter function. We're not going to need those dashes, and this is going to show up as 35 as you see right there, but it's tiny, so let's bump up the font size. So font, let's also make it thicker. So something like that. Let's add the percent at the end, and that's going to be simple. We just concatenate with that percent string. Okay, next step, put this in the middle, and that means a bit of layout. And if you've seen my previous videos, then you know where this is going. HTML, body, div, on all of these, just set display grid, right? And then the HTML, make this full height. Finally, on the body, set place items center. Now, some people may wonder what's the difference between place content and place items, because place content is something I use a lot more often in my demos. Thing is, visually at this point they produce the exact same result. They don't do the same thing in the back, which that's why it's good to know the difference between them. So here you can see how place content positions the entire grid. So basically it shrinks the entire grid to the minimum required space in the center, both horizontally and vertically. Okay, in this case the grid still stretches all across the element that has display grid set on it. However, the grid items shrink to the middle, so in the center, both horizontally and vertically, shrink to the middle of the grid area they are in. So each of these is positioned within its respective grid area, which in this case is just one cell. Okay, so as you can see, in this case, the items are in the middle of their grid cells. In this case, the entire grid is in the middle of the grid parent. Okay, so that's the difference. In this case, with the code we have so far, it makes no difference. However, we're going to make some changes later on, which makes place items a better choice than place content center. Okay, now at this point, let's create the ring. We're going to set a radius for the outer ring. Let's say, so outer radius of ring, okay, and here we're going to have a before. That's where we're going to create the ring. We're going to set the padding to that radius. We're going to set the background something like deep pink, and we're going to set the content because otherwise nothing's going to show up, and we're going to see it above that text. However, we want the text and this before pseudo element, we want both the after and the before, we want them stacked one on top of the other. And to do so, we are going to use grid area. So before and after, so both of them, they are going to occupy the same grid area at the intersection between the first row and first column. So that's one cell. This load element is a one cell grid, one row, one column. Now, we could set place items center on this load element as well, but this would mean that the after is going to shrink to the middle of the grid. And that's not quite what we want, because if you look right here, you can see how the gradient on the text and the gradient on the ring are continuous. And if we shrink the after to the middle, then we're going to need to explicitly set a gradient size in order to make the gradient on the after the same size as the gradient on the before. So we don't want to overcomplicate things. So we're just going to resort to doing this. Add the after there, and here we're going to set place items center. So the after itself is a grid, and its text content is a grid item. But the after still stretches all across the entire space, occupies the exact same space as the before. Now we want the before to become a ring, and we are going to do that with a radial gradient. So it's going to go from transparent, and by the way, this thing can also be written as transparent black. So black alpha 0. Okay, that fourth 0 is the alpha. Then we're going to have red, and then black to, back to transparent. Okay, transparent black, same thing. Okay, now we're going to want to go only to the edge. Here in this case, the 0% is right there in the middle, 100% is at the corners of the square, but we're going to want to have 100% on the edges of the square. So we are going to use closest side. Now in this case, all the sides are at the same distance from the center, so closest side is pretty much any side. However, in other situations, we may have a rectangle, so the distance to all the sides is not going to be equal. Or we may have this circle positioned somewhere else, circle or ellipse positioned somewhere else. So at 25% instead of 50%. So that's when closest side, furthest side, that's when they make a difference. In this case, all sides are at the same distance. Now we're going to want to go with this transparency up to the ring thickness. So up to the ring thickness, away from 100%. So it's going to be 100% minus the ring thickness, or border, or whatever you want to call that part. This is going to be a fraction of the radius. So let's say 0.2 times the outer radius. This is the ring thickness. So here we're going to go. Actually, we are going to use a custom property right here. So 100% minus the ring thickness. And this is going to be inner, right, radius of ring. This is going to be the outer radius of ring, the one that we use for the padding. Now, the simplest thing is to just have 0 and 100% there. And you can see we have our ring, but I don't like those jagged edges. So let's get rid of them. We are going to get rid of them using a calc. So we are going to have, instead of 0 there, we're going to have calc, that radius plus 1 pixel. And here, instead of 100%, we are going to have calc 100% minus 1 pixel. The last stop defaults to 100%, so we don't need to explicitly set 100% there. Just like we didn't need to set 0 there to indicate that the first transparent band starts from 0. Okay, now having done this, we have that ring, but we only want a slice of it. Ignoring the ring part for a moment, we get a slice using a conic-gradient. And I used linear because conic doesn't have autocomplete, which is ridiculous, but yeah. Closest side also doesn't have autocomplete, and this is a pretty old feature, so that's annoying. Now, the solid part, the red, is going to go up to that p%. And then we are going to have transparency, like that. and you can see. Now, what we actually want is the intersection of those two. And perhaps you could do some, complicated things with blending, but I think it's simpler to just use this as a mask. So here, we're going to take this out. We're going to keep using deep pink for a little while. Make this a mask. So it's going to look like that. And here, we're actually going to set that. And you're going to see how it doesn't work. Because we still need our good old friend, the WebKit prefix. Yay. Not really. Okay, now having done this, it's still not what we want. So we want the intersection of those two mask layers. And this is done with compositing. I actually wrote a very detailed article explaining the compositing operations, and the one that we need is intersect. So we only see the pixels of the masked element from where the two mask layers intersect, okay? So in this case, you can see the two mask layers. This one goes from solid to transparent. This has solid bands and transparency in between. So here we're going to have these bands that go from solid to transparent, and this is going to be the masked element. Okay, so this is what intersect does. We're going to have mask composite. And you've guessed it, this is not going to work. We are going to need again our good old friend. And when we add that, you are going to see that it still doesn't work. And that's because WebKit browsers don't support the standard intersect value. They need a WebKit specific non-standard value, which is source in. And this doesn't make any sense to me. And most of the values for WebKit don't make any sense to me. Source over, source out, source in. XOR does make sense, but the source ones, I know them now because I've used them so much, but before I was just looking them up. And by the way, everything, all the resources, they are going to be linked in the description, so don't worry about that part. Now you can see how we have the intersection right there. And how do we animate this? Basically, we need to animate this conic gradient slice to go from 0 to 100%. But how do we animate a gradient? Well, again, I wrote an article about that, the state of changing gradients with CSS transitions and animations. And what we need to animate in this case is this stop right here for red. We need to animate it so it goes from 0 to 100. And we can do that by animating that custom property P. However, in order to animate it, we need to register it. So we need Houdini. This is only going to be supported in Chromium browsers. Sorry about that. So we register it, P. Syntax. And we're not using number, because if we were to use number, then it wouldn't animate in the content here, because counters aren't going to work with decimals. Okay, so initial value is going to be 0, inherits true, because we're going to animate this P, we're going to animate it on the load element, but we want it to inherit on the before so that this conic gradient animates, and we want it to inherit on the after so that the counter increments. Okay? So now we are going to have our animation right there, but first we are going to need to set an animation duration, let's say something like that, and then we are going to need to create that set of keyframes. So 50%, 100%, P is going to be 100, and now we are here. And we're going to have our animation P, that animation duration, linear, infinite. Okay, we are going to have to comment out that part because otherwise it's going to start from 35% and that's not what we want. Okay, in that case it started from 0. Okay, good, nice. Now the next step is we're going to want to set that gradient for both the before and the after. So we're going to set background, linear gradient, and we are going to use that second one right there, the lighter one, like that. Let's see it. Okay, now we're going to need to get rid of that deep pink background that we set on the before. And for the after, we are going to need to set background clip to text, which again is not going to work without our old friend. Yeah. Of course, now we still see the black text, so we need to set color to transparent, like that, and now we should see it. Look at it, so nice. Let's make it at an angle, something like that. Okay, and now that we've done this, we are going to want to change the radius after half the animation to make the inner radius, to make it go from that value 100% minus the ring thickness, okay, to make it go from there to 0. Actually to -1, because here we're going to add 1, so the red is going to start from 1 pixel. If it goes just, if this inner radius just goes down to 0, the red is going to start from 1 pixel, and we want it to start from 0. So this inner radius is going to go to -1. This means we need to also need a register So we're going to register that, and this is going to be length percentage. 0 pixels inherits false because we only animated on the before. We don't need any animation elsewhere. And here we're going to have keyframes. And from 0% to 50% is going to be that value that we've already set right here. So we're just going to copy paste that. And then 75 to 100%, not 2000. Although in practice it doesn't make any difference if I leave it like that. So that's going to be -1 pixel, not 1x. And now we are going to have an animation right here as well. So let's make it ease out like that. Let's see it. Okay, but now we don't see the text anymore because it just becomes one with the before. So we are going to use a difference blend mode. Now again, I wrote an article on this, taming blend modes, difference and exclusion. And if you have two identical layers and you use difference, then the result is going to be a black layer, because difference basically does the difference per channel, gets the absolute difference per channel between the two layers. So identical layers means the 3 channels are identical. So red minus the same value red is going to give us 0. So we're going to get 0 on all 3 channels, but 0 on all 3 channels is black. Okay, so that's what's happening there. Mixed blend mode, difference, let's see it. Now you can see it. Okay, now this would look like we're seeing through if the body had a background that was, let's say, black. It would look like we're seeing through. But if the body has a lighter background, then we are still going to see black there. That is the problem. So what we can do is use another blending operation right here on the load. So we're going to have mixed blend mode, lighten. Now everything is lighter than black. Lighten is going to take just the lighter layer, but every color is lighter than black, so we should be seeing that gray. However, in Chrome, blending with the body doesn't quite work as intended. So we are going to use a before pseudo element, right? And since we need these two layers to be like that, we are going to need to set grid area, like same value as there. Oops. I'm messing things up. I cannot use the keyboard. So we're going to need to take that, right? And div before, after, right? Grid area on everything. Okay, so here we're going to set the padding to something bigger than that outer radius. So let's say like that. We are going to set the background, let's say blue, and of course a content, because otherwise we aren't going to see anything. So now when this gets blended, we should be seeing blue there. Okay, but blue is not what we want. What we want is a gradient using those darker colors. So linear gradient using those colors. Let's also make this at an angle, like that. And I think after this we can just collapse the body. Just, I don't know, like that. And let's say a box shadow. Something like that. Let's see it. Maybe even bigger. Like that, and we could actually make this darker. I think it's going to look better if we make it darker. Okay, now this leaves just one more thing to do, and that is those rounded edges, those, not rounded edges, rounded ends. You can see for our ring slices, ring segments, whatever. So those rounded ends is what we want. We can collapse the after as well. So for that, we are going to add more radial gradients. So we are going to have a tiny radial gradient that produces a disk right there at the end. So that's going to be circle at 50% horizontally, and then vertically it's going to be a unit radius that's going to be half the ring thickness. So this unit radius is going to be half that ring thickness. Right here. And we need to interpolate that because it's in the value of a custom property. Then we're going to have red up to that unit radius. Something like that. And you can see how it does the intersection, but we don't want that same intersect compositing operation. We want the add, just place it over, right? So just place that last radial gradient over everything. Okay, that looks pretty good, except we have jagged edges. We don't like those. So we are going to fix it, but we are going to set this to a custom property because it's going to repeat for the rounding for the other end. So, okay. Now here, right, we are going to have calc minus 1 pixel, and here we're going to have that unit radius. And it's going to look kind of like that. You can see it. Okay, now we are going to have another such radial gradient for the other end. Okay, and we are going to put that at the end. So let me just explain why. Now, compositing, you can see how we have add intersect. We are going to have add between this and the result of the previous ones. We're going to have intersect between this one, the second one from the top, and the result of the previous ones. And then we don't have any other compositing operation. So we're going to start over and we're going to have add in between these two bottom ones. So that's why I added it here. If I were to add it at the top, then I would have to have another add here at the beginning. Like this, it's right there, and yeah. Okay, so having done this, here we're not going to have the same position. We're going to have an X and an Y, which change as that end goes around the circle. So we're going to have X, which is going to default to 0, and then Y, which is going to default to 0 again, like that. And at this point we're not seeing it because it falls outside the radial gradient. So one thing we can do is just switch up these two radial gradients. And now we're going to be able to see it, because this one is on top of everything after the intersection. Okay, now we're going to want to animate that X and Y. Thing is, how do you get the position of this disk that moves all around the circle? So this disk is basically moving on a circle. The position of a point on a circle is determined by its radius, which in this case is fixed. So that just leaves the angle, you can see. In this case, we have, this is the X projection, the X, this is the Y projection, the Y, and this is also going to be equal to Y because this is a rectangle, this is a right angle. So in this right triangle, we have that X is going to be the radius known times cosine of the angle, and the Y is going to be the radius, again known, times the sine of the angle. However, we don't have trigonometric functions in CSS yet, but we can still approximate that motion somehow. And let's just do that, but first we're going to have to register both X and Y so that we can animate them. Now, see, that's the issue. If we didn't have this problem of not having trigonometric functions in CSS, if we could have trigonometric functions, then we wouldn't need to animate X and Y individually. So, and we'd save these animations, but like this. Now, let's say that we are going to set X to 50%, and initially Y is going to be that unit radius. So basically it's going to be in the same position as that one right there. So now you don't see it there because it overlaps there. Now we're going to have keyframes Y, and here we're going to have 100%. Y is going to be calc 100% minus that unit radius. And now we're going to add that animation. So that's going to be Y. It's going to be a quarter of the animation duration. We're going to use a easing, a custom easing. For now, we're not going to add it. Infinite, alternate. Let's see it. You can see how it goes up and down. And I was saying something about custom easing. This is going to be just easing out for now. We're going to tweak it later. And you can see how it moves horizontally. Now we could do the exact same thing for the X. So here we're going to have X. Okay. I'm great at messing things up if it involves a keyboard. Now this is going to be X, and again X is going to start like that. Let's get rid of those. And now you can see how it moves. So we're going to need to change a bit those values. So the X is going to start from minus half that animation duration. And you can see how it's kind of approximating what we want, but it's not quite it. Now the question is, how do we get the proper approximation of that motion? A while ago, I wrote this article about emulating CSS timing functions with JavaScript. And in it, I get to this point where we emulate easing out with a sine function. You can see how the easing is dashed in orange and the sine is in purple. So they're very close, but not quite the same. So we just need to tweak out the cubic-bezier that corresponds to easing out, right? Just use that right here, and we're going to tweak those values so that we get something that approaches what we want more. And let's also make this so you can see how this is a bit closer, but not quite it. So let's say it's going to be something like that. Now this is very, very close. And I think that if we do something like this, this should be enough. I mean, it looks good enough to me, and I'm just going to leave it like this. And you can see the animation. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's it. This is what I wanted to show you for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, if you like the work that I've been putting out for about a decade now and you want me to be able to do more in the future, please consider supporting it. You can do so by being a cool cat and becoming a patron on Patreon. The link is going to be in the description. Or if monthly support is not your style, there's the option of a one-time donation. Again, the link is going to be in the description. Or you can make the stray cat happy with a gift off her wish list. Again, the links are going to be in the description, as well as links for all the resources in here. Or you could at least share this to show the world what can be done with CSS these days. Because honestly, I think it's pretty damn cool. And you know what else is cool? This number right here, because it's nice and symmetrical. And as I mentioned, I've been doing web stuff. I've been putting it out for about a decade now. I started a Stack Overflow account and answering CSS questions and stuff like that. After a while of commenting on tech blogs and stuff like that. And in June, I'm going to turn 10 years old on CodePen. So it's cool to get to 10K in 10 years. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Bye.